They walk past you in hallways, mistake your silence for weakness, your stillness for emptiness. But predators don't announce their presence before the hunt. Tigers don't roar warnings to their prey. The ocean doesn't scream before the wave crashes. And you're not quiet because you're afraid. You're quiet because you're calculating. Every insult they threw, cataloged. Every door they slammed, noted. While they performed, you observed. While they celebrated being loud, you became lethal. The quiet kid isn't hiding. The quiet kid is loading. Let's get something straight right now. There's a difference between being silent and being empty, between observing and being invisible, between patience and passivity. And somewhere along the way, someone convinced you that if you're not the loudest voice in the room, you don't matter. That if you're not constantly performing your confidence, you must not have any. They taught you wrong. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and people glance past you like you're furniture? When your ideas get ignored in meetings, only to be praised when someone louder repeats them 5 minutes later? When they interpret your thoughtfulness as uncertainty, your careful words as lack of conviction? Yeah, that burning in your chest isn't shame. That's jet fuel waiting for ignition. Here's what nobody tells you about being underestimated. It's the most powerful position in any game. While everyone's watching the peacock spread its feathers, nobody's tracking the snake in the grass. While they're distracted by the performer on stage, nobody sees you dismantling the entire theater from the foundation up. Think about water for a second. Soft, quiet, seemingly weak. People build their houses confident that water will stay in its lane. Then the water waits, patient, silent, calculating, and over years it carves through mountains. It doesn't argue with the stone. It doesn't announce its intentions. It just shows up, consistently, relentlessly, until the mountain has no choice but to surrender. That's you. You've spent years absorbing information while they were broadcasting opinions, learning patterns while they were seeking attention, building depth while they were performing shallow. And now you're sitting on an arsenal they can't even comprehend because they were too busy listening to themselves to notice what you were becoming. But here's where it gets interesting. Here's where the transformation actually begins. Because knowing you're powerful and choosing to step into that power are two completely different universes. One keeps you safe in potential. The other demands you burn down every comfortable hiding spot you've built. The moment that changes everything isn't when you finally speak. It's when you realize you were never actually quiet. You were just selective about when to spend your words. You weren't invisible. You were studying the room. You weren't weak. You were choosing your battles with the precision of a chess master planning 12 moves ahead. There's this moment that happens in nature, right before an earthquake. Scientists call it the seismic gap years, sometimes decades of pressure building beneath the surface, while everything above looks perfectly calm. Animals feel it first, that frequency shift that humans can't detect. They start behaving differently, running from areas that look completely safe to everyone else. You're the earthquake, and some people are starting to feel the frequency shift even if they can't name it yet. That coworker who suddenly seems nervous when you speak? They sense something changed in the pressure. That person who used to talk over you now pausing mid-sentence when you enter. The frequency shifted. They don't understand it consciously, but their nervous system is picking up what their ego refuses to acknowledge. That the person they dismissed is operating on a wavelength they can't access. And here's the beautiful, terrifying truth. You don't owe them an explanation. You don't owe them a dramatic transformation montage. You don't need to announce your evolution or perform your growth. Predators don't send advance notice. They just move when the moment is right. But moving requires something most people never develop: the ability to trust your own timing, to resist the pressure to prove yourself on someone else's schedule, to understand that power isn't about being the first to strike. It's about striking at the exact moment that creates maximum impact with minimum effort. You ever watch a master billiards player? They're not hitting hard. They're hitting precise. One perfect angle, and every ball on the table moves exactly where they want. Meanwhile, the amateur is slamming balls around, creating noise and chaos, accomplishing nothing. Loud doesn't equal effective. Flashy doesn't equal skilled. Strategic silence paired with precision action, that's how you change the entire game. Think about your journey for a second. Really think about it. Every time you held your tongue when you wanted to explode, that wasn't weakness. That was you building pressure in the chamber. Every time you let someone take credit while you kept building, that wasn't doormat behavior. That was you understanding that short-term recognition means nothing when you're playing the infinite game. Every time you chose observation over participation, you weren't missing out. You were downloading the entire source code while they were stuck on the user interface. You've been training without knowing you were training. Strengthening without tracking the weights. Evolving in ways that won't show up on anyone's radar until it's too late for them to adapt. And that knot you feel in your chest when you're in rooms where everyone's performing confidence they don't possess, that's not inadequacy. That's your system rejecting fake as fuel. Your instincts screaming that you don't belong in spaces built on volume instead of value, on performance instead of substance, on networking instead of mastery. You don't belong there. You belong where the real work happens, where words cost something because they actually mean something, where silence isn't awkward. It's where the deepest thinking occurs. Here's what shifts. When you fully embrace this, you stop seeing quiet as something to overcome and start seeing it as your tactical advantage. Lions don't explain themselves to sheep. Hurricanes don't apologize before forming. Tidal waves don't send courtesy texts before reshaping coastlines. And you don't need permission to become undeniable. But, and this is crucial, becoming undeniable doesn't mean becoming loud. It means becoming so precise, so skilled, so undeniably valuable that your presence speaks louder than anyone's performance ever could. It means developing the kind of competence that makes noise irrelevant. Think about the most powerful people you've encountered in your life. Not the loudest, the most powerful? Did they need to tell you they mattered? Or did you just feel it the moment they entered the space? Did they perform authority? Or did they simply embody it so completely that questioning it never even occurred to you? That's frequency. That's presence. That's what you've been building while everyone else was busy broadcasting. Now comes the part where most motivational content lies to you. They tell you transformation is comfortable, that finding your power is this beautiful, gentle journey of self-discovery. Let me tell you what they won't. Stepping into your actual power is terrifying because it requires you to abandon every safe story you've told yourself about why you're not there yet. It requires you to stop waiting for permission, validation, the perfect moment, the right credentials, the ideal circumstances. It requires you to move while you're still scared, speak while your voice shakes, claim space while imposter syndrome is screaming in your skull. You know what happens to the person who waits until they're completely ready? They wait forever. Because ready is a moving target designed to keep you safe and small and stuck. The move is simple, but not easy. Decide that your timing is right, because you decided it's right. Not because external conditions aligned. Not because you finally feel confident, but because you're done letting other people's perception of you dictate your reality. Here's your actual power source, the thing they don't want you to realize. Their underestimation of you is based on incomplete information. They're working with outdated data. They're making assessments based on a version of you that's already obsolete. While they're congratulating themselves for knowing who you are, you've already evolved past their entire framework for understanding you. And the moment you stop caring about updating their perception, the moment you stop trying to prove yourself to people operating with expired information, that's when the real earthquake begins. Because suddenly, you're not moving to convince them. You're moving because it's time. Not reacting to their dismissal, acting on your own internal compass. Not seeking validation, creating results that speak in a language validation can't touch. Watch what happens when you shift from "I'll show them" to "I'll show myself what I'm capable of." The entire energy transforms. Revenge becomes irrelevant. Proof becomes unnecessary. You're not playing their game anymore. You're creating an entirely new game where their rules don't even apply. This is where the quiet kid becomes dangerous. Not because they got loud, but because they stopped playing on anyone's terms but their own. Let me paint you a picture. There's a kid sitting in the back of the classroom. Everyone assumes he's not paying attention. Teachers write him off. Other students don't invite him to group projects. He sits there day after day absorbing everything. Not just the lessons, the patterns, who gets praised for what, which behaviors get rewarded, what the social dynamics actually are versus what people pretend they are. 10 years later, that kid is running the company. Not because he suddenly became charismatic, not because he learned to play their game better, but because while they were performing, he was understanding. While they were networking, he was mastering. While they were optimizing for appearances, he was building something real. And when he finally makes his move, it's not dramatic. It's not announced. It's just so well executed, so precisely timed, so thoroughly planned that by the time anyone realizes what happened, it's already done. That's the power of the quiet observer. That's what you've been becoming, whether you recognized it or not. But here's where most people stumble. They gather all this knowledge, build all this capability, develop all this insight, and then they wait for someone to give them permission to use it. They wait for an invitation. They wait for someone to notice and promote them. They wait for external validation to confirm what they already know internally. And while they're waiting, someone with half their capability and twice their volume takes the opportunity. Not because they're better, but because they didn't wait. So here's the question that matters. How much longer are you going to let your power sit idle because you're waiting for permission that's never coming? Think about every major shift in history. The person who changed everything wasn't the one everyone expected. It was the outsider, the one they dismissed, the one they didn't see coming because they were too busy watching the obvious candidates. Lincoln was a backwoods lawyer. Einstein was a patent clerk. The Wright brothers ran a bicycle shop. Nobody gave them permission. Nobody validated their ambitions before they pursued them. They just understood something fundamental. The world doesn't owe you recognition. It responds to results. And results don't care about your backstory. Results don't care if you were the quiet kid or the popular one. Results don't care about your anxiety or your fear or your imposter syndrome. Results only care about one thing. Did you do the thing or not? This is where intention meets action. This is where potential becomes kinetic. This is where you stop being the person who could and become the person who did. And it starts with something so small that most people miss it entirely. It starts with changing one internal narrative. Just one. Not all of them. Not a complete personality overhaul. Just one story you've been telling yourself that's keeping you locked in observation mode instead of execution mode. Maybe it's the story that you need more preparation, that you need one more course, one more certification, one more year of experience before you're ready. What if that's just fear wearing a productivity mask? Maybe it's the story that you're protecting yourself by staying under the radar. That visibility is dangerous. That obscurity is safety. What if that's just trauma from past judgment trying to keep you small? Maybe it's the story that you're somehow more noble or authentic by not seeking recognition. That wanting to be seen is shallow or egotistical. What if that's just conditioning from people who benefited from you staying invisible? Pick one story, just one, and ask yourself, is this serving my growth or my fear? Because here's what I've noticed watching people transform. The ones who actually change their lives don't do it through massive overnight shifts. They do it through micro commitments that compound. They do it by questioning one limiting belief, then another, then another. They do it by taking one small action that scares them, then another, then another. And somewhere in that process, they stop recognizing the person they used to be. Not because they became someone else, but because they became more fully themselves. They shed the protective layers, the performative versions, the people-pleasing adaptations. And what emerged wasn't a new person. It was the person who was always there, finally allowed to breathe. That version of you already exists. You felt it in moments when you forgot to be self-conscious, when you were so focused on something that mattered that you stopped monitoring how you were being perceived, when you spoke from genuine conviction instead of calculated safety. That's not a goal to reach. That's your baseline to reclaim. And reclaiming it requires something uncomfortable. You have to grieve who you pretended to be. You have to let die all the versions of yourself you created to survive environments that weren't built for your thriving. You have to release the masks, even though they're familiar, even though they kept you safe, even though part of you still believes you need them. You don't need them anymore. You never needed them. They needed you to think you did. Think about a snake shedding its skin. It doesn't happen all at once. It's uncomfortable. The snake is vulnerable during the process. The new skin underneath is tender, not yet hardened. But the old skin doesn't fit anymore. It restricts movement. It limits growth. It has to go. Your old protective identities are the same. They served you once. They don't anymore. And trying to grow while still wearing them is like trying to sprint while wrapped in chains. So what does shedding look like practically? It looks like speaking up in the meeting even though your voice might shake. It looks like sharing your idea even though someone might criticize it. It looks like taking the opportunity even though you don't meet every qualification. It looks like moving before you're ready, because ready is a trap. It looks like trusting that your years of observation gave you something more valuable than the performers have. Depth, understanding of how systems actually work versus how they pretend to work. The performers know how to work a room. You know how the room works. That's a different level of intelligence entirely. And when you combine that understanding with action, when you stop just observing and start implementing, when you take everything you've learned from the shadows and bring it into the light, that's when you become unstoppable. Not because you're suddenly confident. Confidence is overrated. But because you're committed. Because you've decided that living in potential is more painful than risking failure. Because you've realized that being underestimated is only powerful if you eventually prove the estimation wrong. Here's the truth about quiet power that nobody tells you. It has an expiration date. If you never activate it, it just becomes wasted potential. The knowledge you gathered, the patterns you recognized, the skills you developed, they don't matter if they stay theoretical. At some point, you have to place your bet. You have to put your chips on the table. You have to trust that everything you've been building in private is ready for public deployment. And yeah, maybe you'll fail. Maybe your first move won't be perfect. Maybe people will criticize, or doubt, or dismiss. So what? They were already doing that when you were invisible. At least now you're in the arena instead of watching from the stands. At least now you're playing your own game instead of spectating theirs. At least now you have a chance. Because here's what's guaranteed. If you don't move, nothing changes. You stay the quiet observer. You stay the underestimated one. You stay safe and small and stuck. And 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you're still telling yourself the same story about how you're building something, how you're preparing, how you're almost ready. Meanwhile, life is happening. Opportunities are passing. The clock is ticking. And one day you wake up and realize you spent so much time loading the weapon that you forgot to fire it. Don't be that person. Don't let your power die theoretical. Don't let your potential become your eulogy. The world doesn't need another observer. It needs builders, creators, people who take their unique perspective and turn it into something tangible, something that shifts how things work, something that proves the doubters wrong, not through argument, but through undeniable results. You have everything you need right now, not to be perfect, not to have all the answers, but to start, to move, to activate what you've been cultivating. And when you do, when you finally step out of observation mode and into creation mode, something remarkable happens. You realize that the fear was always worse than the reality. that the judgment you were avoiding was never as devastating as you imagined, that people's opinions carry weight only if you give them permission to, and the ones who matter, the ones who are also building instead of performing, they recognize you immediately. They see the shift, they feel the frequency, and suddenly you're not alone anymore. You're not the isolated observer, you're part of a different tribe. The tribe of people who chose growth over comfort, action over safety, becoming over belonging. This is your moment. Not someday. Not when conditions are perfect. Not when you feel ready. Right now. The predator doesn't wait for permission to hunt. The earthquake doesn't apologize before reshaping the landscape. The river doesn't ask for approval before carving the canyon. And you don't need anyone's blessing to become who you've always been underneath the silence. The predator doesn't announce the hunt, it just changes the entire food chain. So here's your moment. What's one move you've been calculating in silence that's ready to go live? Drop it below. Let's see what the quiet ones have been building while the world was distracted.